Hello, welcome to another episode of Underground Knowledge. I'm James Morcan, and my guest today is Janet Colbert. Now, Janet is an author and retired neonatal intensive care nurse. And I've actually just finished reading her book, actually. It's called STOPPNow, and that's a stop with a double P. And the STOP stands for Stop the Organized Pill Pushers. So as you might guess from that, Janet is essentially on a mission and has set up an organization that goes by the same title, Stop Now, and it's about the opiate epidemic, which is also, I believe, known as the opioid epidemic. I can't work. Maybe Janet can fill me in as to which one is the more commonly used there, but it's that relates to the overprescribing of opiate-based painkillers, and that can lead to problems like it can often lead to addiction, and also babies born to mothers who are addicted to these painkillers. So the babies end up with the same sort of symptoms that an adult would, the whole withdrawal symptoms, the works. And that was the eye opener for me in reading this book, is just what these babies have to go through for, and they didn't do anything wrong. And so, yeah, Janet's basically on a crusade. I wrote in a review on her book, actually, that she's lobbying politicians. She's trying to tackle big pharma, and that ties into many, long-time listeners of this show will know that, that there's many issues interrelating with that. There's big pharma aggression, there's political corruption, and potentially, I think, there's inept medical systems that need restructuring, in my opinion, and we'll get to that I've got some questions on that too. But Janet, welcome. Thank you for giving up your time today.
Oh, I appreciate very much your covering this, because the story does need to be told.
Yeah, and in your book, one of the things that really struck me, as I was saying, there was that you're holding and caring for these drug-addicted babies, and they, as tiny infants, and some of them are born premature, I understand, are going through the exact same withdrawal symptoms that heroin addicts or long-term addicts of opiate-based painkillers would go through. So I'm just wondering, for listeners, if you could, start from the beginning here as to how you, as a nurse, started to see a spike in these babies that were drug addicted to opiates, and also what symptoms do they exhibit?
Okay, sure. In about 2009, I would say, all of a sudden our unit was full of these drug addicted babies, and all the nurses every day, in the lounge are like, what's going on? Why do we have so many of these babies all of a sudden? And we really didn't know what the cause of it was. At that time, I'd never heard of a pill mill and, those kinds of things. And then at the same time, my friend Renee was doing tough love with two of her children, two of her boys. And one of them overdosed, and the hospital called her, and she went down to the hospital, told him, I just want you to know I love you. And he was naturally alive. It was an overdose, but he did not die in that overdose. And he told her all about the pill mills and how you could just walk in with an old MRI or just feigning pain and walk out with pills. And what they were giving, there was a cocktail of pills. There was three of them. It was oxycodone. It was Xanax, which is the anti-anxiety,
Right.
and Soma, which is a muscle relaxer. All day long, everyone that walked into that building was given prescriptions for those three. And actually back then, in 2010, they passed a law in Florida, which did save some lives, I believe, where they could no longer dispense it. At that time, the doctors could actually dispense on site there. They made that into a law because somebody living in a remote area, which I don't know how big the city is you're in, but I saw very remote areas in Australia.
Yeah.
If someone didn't have access to a pharmacy, so they thought we'd let the doctors give it out. Well, give it out they were. And these kids were leaving with 500 pills, and it was all cash only.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
And so going back to what about the babies who are born to mothers who are addicted to these opiates? What sort of symptoms do they exhibit?
Okay. Now, so understand that these babies, their whole, natal time inside the womb, we're getting through the umbilical cord this supply of drugs.
Wow.
And then when that umbilical cord is cut, they're no longer getting them.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
sometimes, yeah, it would take, a few days. And this is why, we wonder how many babies go home. With some mothers, it's very obvious. And,
Right.
so we would know to test. But how many babies are going home with parents that it was not picked up, and now they're living and for their every need on someone who is a substance abuser and will do anything to get that substance, and caring for the baby would come further down the list of their things they must do. So anyway, the symptoms they were showing, they would be screaming and limbs very, very stiff. So they're using physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, because they couldn't feed, and they would be, just screaming. Their little butts would be broken down, very, very red, rashy. We were giving them morphine and clonidine every 3 hours. That's what we give them to try and ease them through the withdrawals. And they're not usually born premature, although I had asked a professor I saw one time, a doctor who's a neonatologist from, I think it was Shands Hospital in the northern part of the state of Florida, but I met him at a seminar we were having. Actually, it was a drug task force that Attorney General Pam Bondi had formed. And he spoke there. And at the time, we had a baby on our unit. The mother was addicted to every kind of drug. It's called poly substance abuse.
Yeah.
And she checked out AMA. And even the baby had, because her blood was, let's say, O positive, it was positive, and she should have gotten a medicine during her pregnancy so the baby's body would not attack, because the babies often can have similar, and this has nothing to do with the drug addiction. Anyway, she refused to get that. She didn't, and she just left the baby on the unit and checked out. So
right. Well, I think you've got a fascinating beginning to this, because I think you're showing how vast a problem this is, because it's multi-generational as well. It's not just
right.
I never would have. I know it's pretty obvious when you think about it, but I wouldn't have naturally assumed that this would carry through to the children to that extent. And I just hadn't logically thought it through. And it takes someone like you to actually point that out. Well, hey, I was in one of these wards, and I saw this massive spike from about 2009, which times with the opiate epidemic, which is when they say it began. And the other thing I wonder there is, I know you were saying to me off the air that you haven't read any studies, but I do actually wonder what sort of long-term symptoms those babies would have. And, you mentioned there that some babies would go home and wouldn't actually be diagnosed. So therefore, I wonder down the line if they could get called ADHD or autistic or behavioral problems, or because they're screaming all day. I don't know.
I think that that's the problems that they are having in school. But like you say, since it's almost rather new, in terms of doing research to follow up with these babies and see what symptoms they are showing once they're in school trying to actually sit in a classroom and learn. But I can tell you, I'm very blessed to be in this. I'm in many advocacy groups, as you can imagine. And one of them, we have an epidemiologist from Nova Southeastern University called Jim Hall is his name, Jim Hall. His name is Jim Hall. And he's brilliant and the humblest man you'll ever meet. But he provides us with so much data. So just to give you a perspective on this, 92,100 children in the foster care system in the year 2016 whose removal from the home was associated with circumstances involving parents' drug abuse.
92,000, wow.
92,000,
Okay.
in the United States. So this is what happens to these babies too. It doesn't end when they don't go home until they leave our unit. They are off, going through withdrawals. They are okay that way. But many of them, because of the parental situation, they'll either end up with foster care, as in this instance, we discharged to an agency called ChildNet, or they go home with the grandmothers. So you have a lot of grandmothers. There's, tons and tons of grandmothers that are, in their 80s raising children
Oh
now.
man. Oh,
Right.
okay.
And I don't know if the picture made it to you in Australia, but there's the Ohio Police Department put in a picture of, and they were criticized for putting this picture in, but they came upon this car that was stopped in the middle of the road.
Oh yeah,
And
is that the one you've got on your Amazon profile? Is that the one?
I do, with the
Oh right.
baby.
I assumed that was a mock-up in order to show the problem. Is that a real photo, is it?
That was a real photo, that baby
Wow.
was strapped into the back seat of the car, and that's the grandmother in the front seat.
Really? And she's inebriated too.
She's on opiates. Yeah, she
Right.
was passed out, and the gentleman in the driver's seat was also passed out. They were able to bring them both back, but then 2 weeks later, he died of an overdose. But it also happened in Boynton Beach. It's a city in Florida where two mothers had met in rehab, and part of rehab is relapse. And they were passed out from heroin, and they each had a baby in the back seat, 1 month old and 2 months old. So, this isn't isolated. It's
Pretty
happening.
sad. Pretty sad,
Yeah.
yeah. And the other thing is, the other statistic from your book was in 2016, more Americans died of overdoses to prescription drugs than the entire amount of Americans that died in the Vietnam War.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's
In 1 year.
yeah, in 1 year.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
really is like a war zone, and many people are going through the equivalent of a war with this thing. The other thing that really enlightened me in your book, Stop Now, was these things called pill mills. Now, my God, I don't understand how in 21st century America such clinics can exist. I haven't
Yes.
researched what's here in Australia. I'm sure, like if you'd written that and it was third world countries, I would go, well, okay, cash only clinics that are
Right.
that are set up sometimes by convicted felons, but they hire a doctor that's corrupt. If you'd said maybe the worst third world country in the world with the least regulations, I'd believe it. But how can that happen now in the US?
Right. When we first found out about it, and I first started writing letters to legislators, I thought, well, as soon as I let them know about these little babies on our unit, they will do something. And they weren't doing anything. So myself and a few mothers got out there with our signs. Doctors are killing people, and in front of the pill mills, and people were telling me, and that's why I picked the name Stop Now, as you probably read in the book, because some people tell me this is organized crime, you're going to get killed doing this. But we just brought attention to it, and we were on the front page of the newspaper many times, and that made more mothers come out and more mothers come out, and people stopping on the middle of a 6-lane highway crying. I didn't know anybody was doing anything about this. I buried my daughter, and so, but at the time we did start to go then to civic associations, and many of the people were like, because the lines were wrapped around the building. When they opened in the morning, people were waiting in line to get in there.
Okay.
Yeah. And, and the people in the civic association, they were elderly, and they were like, oh, no wonder we saw those, and we thought pain clinics all over the place. And we thought, oh, they're finally doing something to help us with arthritis, and I was explaining to them what was really going on.
Yeah.
And this one meeting in Hollywood we were at, there was a policeman there and a commissioner. And I was like, oh, good. I'm going to, let the police know we can work together on this. And most of the time, police have been very, very good to us. But this one meeting, the policeman was up there. And at the time, so this had to be, they were just starting to pass in 2011, the PDMP, which is the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. It's a database that doctors can sign on, go into it.
Right.
You walk into a see a doctor and complain of I'm getting the worst headaches and all that, they can sign on the computer and see, gosh, James, you were just over at the doctor's around the corner and
Right.
got pills last week for this. And so that's the reason for the database.
I mean,
But
that's what they've had here for decades, I think. So
Mhm.
yeah.
So we did get that in 2011, but there's a
Mm.
law right now we're trying to get passed in legislation, because since then I've been trying to get it mandatory that the physician use it, and they don't have to.
But what about Janet,
Most don't.
if they went to another state, would that show up still?
We are trying to get that. Some of
Mm.
them are inter-exchange through the states, which that is what we're trying to get now. And I
Yeah.
mean, I suddenly do see a difference in what's happening right now, because just last session, I tried to get limited opiate prescribing,
Yeah.
because what happens, people go in for an injury. Some of it's, done innocently by doctors. There's not just the bad doctors, but they were, I'm going to tell you about a book too, that was written by a doctor, paid for by the pharmacy companies. But, okay. So they'd give somebody a 30-day supply of pills, if
Yeah.
they go in for a simple surgery, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then it's laying around in the medicine cabinet. And some people on their own would, just keep it there. And then one day, if they're got a headache, they'd take it, and they become dependent on it too. But
Mm.
also it ends up on the street. And that's why there's such a proliferation of pills. So we're trying to get, and the representative told me, I think you can do this, and I think it'll work. And he he amended a bill and put a 5-day supply, and it did
That's
pass the House. And then at 3:47 p.m. last March, on a Good Friday, the senator deleted that portion of the bill.
damn. Well, I
And
mean, just if we just stop there. So you and your organization have literally been instrumental in getting safer prescription. What would you call it? Like a limitation of, say, 5 days instead of 10 days or whatever. And
exactly.
so you've got that. By lobbying politicians, you've got that on the bill in the state of Florida, and then they have who was it? The senator or somebody has removed that in power.
Yeah, Senator Jeff Clements was his name in West Palm Beach. He deleted it. And then
Wow. So he has the power that it doesn't have to go through the entire Senate. He can just delete it himself, or
he actually was sponsoring the bill even. And
mm,
so then it came out months and months later that he was sleeping with a lobbyist, and so he resigned. It wasn't a drug lobbyist.
oh man,
but,
this is
so
like this is a bad movie. Yeah.
I know. So this is the shenanigans that's going on. And then
Okay.
someone that was a senator for a very long time, his name was Jack Ladbala. He too ended up resigning, and he was going to run for governor. And it was reported that he was sleeping with lobbyists, and it was rather known that that's how they could get him to pass laws. So,
Okay.
so we did
Right.
not get it last session, but this session, the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, like I say, all of a sudden I see a big change. He declared a state of emergency. He is supportive of this, which last session he didn't support it. He didn't remark on it at all. But this time, even the senator that is sponsoring the bill is on the the Senate majority, and she's sponsoring the bill. It passed the House so far, and the House vote was 114 yays and 0 nays.
Zero
And
nays.
then,
Okay.
yeah, and then on the Senate side, it's in voting now, but it has passed every single committee meeting so far with the same thing, all for it. So, like I say, I just all of a sudden this is going to go through this year. I have no doubt about it, and it's a 3-day supply.
3 day. That's
3 day.
great. Yeah. Well, I mean, if we just go back to the pill mills, because I'm still confused. Like at number one, they were cash only. They don't
Mm-hmm.
take. I seem to remember from your book, they don't take insurance.
Right.
And surely it would have been other doctors and that would have noticed. Well, let's say your general practitioner you go to, but you say that someone would have told them, well, I'm getting these from this pill mill they'd call it a different name, but obviously it's some other clinic. So surely it seems to me like that was, I don't know, would that have been illegal back then, or they learned how to bend the system?
Well, see, the problem was, and I can understand why they couldn't shut them down right away and go in and arrest the doctors, because this is a legal prescription drug. You know, we're talking about Xanax, which is legal, the oxycodone, which is legal. So that's why they couldn't just go in there and shut them down. And first, when we started, there was no consequences for either the pill clinic owner or the doctors inside, but they were arresting. I mean, we would have on our unit a father calling from jail because he was arrested for selling his little stash. You know, they made little entrepreneurs out of them. But yet the real drug dealer was inside the building and they weren't touching them. So, you know, that is what's going on. But I wanted to let you know this book that was written by Scott Fishman, he's an MD, and in the United States Senate, that investigation, I have one of the letters in the book, and this letter was sent to the Federation of State Medical Boards, and in it they're asking, we want to know how much money was paid to Scott Fishman for writing that book, how many was distributed, because they were giving these books out at the or at all of the Federation of Medical Board meetings, which doctors were a part of.
Okay.
And part of the statement, this book was printed in 2007, and they talk about the undertreatment of pain in America. Sadly,
under treatment. So they're saying that they're not prescribing enough.
Right. Exactly.
That's a joke. Okay.
Yeah. Sadly, many physicians have sought to reduce the risk of opioid prescribing, including the tangible risk to a physician's own licensure if he or she prescribes outside the standards of medical care, by simply not treating patients in pain or by not treating them with controlled substances. But the Federation of State Medical Boards has commissioned this book and is distributing it to physicians to offer clear and concise guidance in managing the risks of pain management. So, you know, this book was bought and financed by the drug companies, and they were educating the doctors that, you know, you're not giving enough. And they also have had that bonus of anybody that died, well, they were drug addicts, you know, but they weren't until you got a hold of them. You know?
Yeah. So once you call someone once you label it in the newspaper a drug addict, it's sort of, people wash their hands of it, don't they?
It was their fault. Yeah.
Right.
That's been the stigma all along with this. And
I mean, what's scary to me, Janet, is throughout your book you name, like there was one woman in particular, I think she was a finance graduate or she was working in finance. She got some injury and then suddenly she was addicted to these, and the next thing that ran out, and she was actually taking heroin, and it can happen that fast. Whereas if you'd said to me this woman is a heroin addict, a whole lot of mental images would come up with that, you see. But if you actually walk back and see how this can lead to that, the over-prescribing of these opiates or these, you know, not enough safety controls, it's really frightening. And I think it's good to remember that it's regular citizens this is happening to over the US and worldwide, you know?
Yes, and none of those people that I met, you know, that they were out with me, or I met the parents later on, none of them would have gone out and bought heroin. But
no,
once they're addicted to that, then they'll do anything to get it.
They need it like the air they breathe, don't they?
And heroin's much cheaper. So
right. Yeah. Can you? One of the things I'm interested in is, and I think there'll be a lot of people even right now who might have been prescribed something, they might have had surgery and that. So what are the most common opiate painkillers, and also which ones, do you know which ones would be more dangerous than others? Like you mentioned OxyContin, oxycodone, which other ones? Yeah.
Well, see, like a Percocet, for instance, if you're familiar with that, that's 5 milligrams oxycodone and 325 milligrams of Tylenol.
Okay.
But what these pill mills were distributing was 30 milligrams of straight oxycodone. Yeah. And some of these, once they were addicted, these, let's say kids, they were taking 25 a day and shooting it up. 25 a day, 30 milligrams oxycodone.
Ooh.
And then what happens very often, and sometimes people were just realizing this as we were marching up and down in front of the pill mills because their child died. That's what happened to my son. Because what happens is if they go to jail or if they go to a rehab center and go off of this, their body has tolerated this 25 a day, and it's almost like they wouldn't have died if they didn't go off it. But when they go off it and then they go on one time, they take it one time and they're dead.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, a quote from your book I wrote down is, oxycodone was never meant for chronic pain.
Right.
So then my question is, why is it being prescribed for chronic pain here?
Because the drug companies have paid very well. Some of these, like American Pain Societies and Federation of Pain Management, and all of these agencies that are really fronts for the drug companies. So they are all saying, and part of the fight for us to make change was many of the people were saying, well, we can't get our pills and we really need it. And it's just because of those drug addicts that we can't get what we need.
Right.
And they're really bought and paid for by the drug companies. And many of times the legislators, when I'd call and try to get something done, they'd be like, well, these people call our offices every day and they can't get their pain meds because the doctors were starting to back off.
Okay.
But, it was never meant for chronic pain, and it won't, of course, cure chronic pain.
No,
it doesn't do anything like that. And I'm starting to see more and more now, like there's some dentists that won't prescribe it at all.
Okay.
Someone goes in for a root canal or something, they say they're actually better off with an anti-inflammatory because you've caused so much stress to that area and it is inflamed, and that is a better management. And they're also studying now about using different modalities at one time, using the anti-inflammatory with the opiate, like let's say for a hip replacement or something.
Yeah.
And, using both of them, so it'd be less opiates and the patients have less length of stay in the hospital. They have less respiratory issues. They have less GI issues. And they find that it's a much better course of treatment than just giving them the opiates.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously there are people in society with acute pain, and these are great things that alleviate that pain. But for every one of them, I suspect there's about 10 people who have just had something like, I don't know, knee surgery or broken foot or something, and it's debatable sometimes whether they need them, wouldn't you say?
Or if they need them for that long. And that's why we're trying to at least get, because there are studies that the longer they're on it, like if it's a 5-day, the chances or the risk is a better word, I guess, of addiction is higher.
That would make sense to me just off the top of my head, because your brain is sort of getting used to that. If you take it, say, 30 days, that's starting to, it's almost like the difference between drinking one night and drinking heavily for 30 nights. Certain addictive peoples could start to, that would make sense. Another quote from your book that I wanted to ask you about, because I don't know, I was just trying to read between the lines actually, was that you're right, the hospital I worked for did not like what I was doing. I was told that they didn't want their paying customers to know that there were drug addicted babies on our unit. So my question is, what are they trying to hide there?
I don't know. I just know that that's the reaction I was getting. And at the same time, there was a hospital, St. Joseph's, on the west coast of Florida in Tampa, and they were in the front page of the newspaper saying 30% of their admissions are drug-addicted babies, and their neonatologists were trying to do something about this. One of them was on the pain task force, or the NAS task force that Pam Bondi had formed. So, but that was their attitude. And one time I know that there was a mother and daughter visiting their baby. The daughter had an addiction problem and had a drug addicted baby. And I was helping her and, teaching her how to bathe the baby and do those kinds of things, even though she, may or may not be going home with this mother, because at the time we were taking our mothers to court, and they would lose custody of that child. So then I was on the front page of the newspaper with what I was trying to do. And when they came in the next day, the mother asked me, "Are you that Janet that was in the newspaper?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I knew it. I knew you were trying. I knew it, And we were just talking. And then someone went in and said something to the social worker, not like telling on me or anything, but that these people, they know Janet from the newspaper and all this.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
So the social worker said to me, "Janet, they're manipulating and they're this." And I said, "I know all that. I know all that. I'm not going to go to court and say she should get custody of her baby. I know that, but we should be helping these mothers." I had gone at the same time. There was this agency, Susan B. Anthony, and their facility was on an old, I don't know what they do in Australia, but what we've done to our mentally ill in this country too is horrible, because they said it was, punishable and not right that we're locking them up and that kind of thing. So now there's a lot of homeless for that reason.
Yeah, yeah.
But this was a big facility. And so what they are doing is they have the drug addicted mothers there, and there's an apartment with 2 bedrooms, and there's 2 mothers and her children in each apartment. Their apartment is not locked. They can go in at any time and check on them, make sure to be cleaned. No one's supposed to be, of course, doing drugs in the living room when they walk in, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And besides going to meetings and structure and that kind of thing, they teach them how to fill out a resume. They teach them how to look in the newspaper for jobs, and they help them out. And if they're late for those meetings, they're not allowed in. And so to teach them to be on time, and it's very good. And now Memorial is actually doing that for mothers. They do have a whole part of their unit which is dedicated to helping these mothers. So
because I just wondered with with going back to the quote there with if you can't trust hospitals, then it starts to get quite worrying to me. Who can you trust? And you mentioned there who would be the paying customers? Are they sometimes the drug companies, or are you talking customers actually private customers, or what?
No, I'm talking about, let's say we were a 60-bed unit. So let's say we have 8 to 10 babies on our unit that are withdrawing, then you still have 50 babies that are there for other reasons. They were born, let's say, at only 25 weeks, or, any other kind of thing. So they didn't want them to know that there's drug addicted babies on our unit.
Wow.
I'm like, come on.
What do they think, that the babies are going to influence the other ones? They say, hey.
Yeah. Or the mother's going to go, we're not going there. That's a bad hospital. I don't know.
Okay. So the other thing I kept thinking as I got to the end, and a lot of your book, you do start alluding to this more and more, and I like that. But is there beyond, obviously the pill mills was a major one, and you and others have worked to shut those down in the state of Florida. But what I keep thinking, is there a bigger picture problem here, and is it a thing that crosses all spectrums of the medical establishment almost? And so, I ask myself, why are opiates being prescribed so much? I still don't understand why they're so widely prescribed, when I know a lot of people who have just had the most minor thing, and then I say, what are you on? And it turns out to be opiates. And it's like, well, why? And isn't there an alternative in many cases? And I mean, you've touched on that with things like the dentist example with anti-inflammatory. So you're actually treating the condition instead of just concealing the pain. But then, do we have a situation where my understanding is opiates are one of the riskiest things you can possibly take. Are there other painkillers that are not at all opiate based that we could be prescribing half the time?
Well, like I've said, if these only came into existence, I think 1999 was when they were first kind of put on the market, or they were first
Right.
trying to get
So
them
what?
out there.
So what were we using before then?
Yeah, and people have had cancer for, centuries, right?
Centuries. Yeah.
So what were they treating them with? So there is other modalities of care. And then there are many doctors that say it would be far better to, treat symptoms with, I know the VA, they've made some major changes because they were just throwing pills at them too. And there were a family
What's the
saying,
VA? The Veterans, is it?
oh, I'm sorry,
Or,
Veterans
right.
Administration. Yeah.
Okay.
Many. And there would be overdoses right on the unit in the VA with, with the parents saying, don't give them anymore. And, so they have drastically changed. And then, there's complaints, and naturally this part wasn't right. They didn't go about doing it perhaps the right way, and just now cutting them off, because you've got someone you've given pills to all these years. You should wean them gradually, and whether they need physical therapy or chiropractor or something else to help them to wean off of this, not just suddenly cut them off. But so there are other alternatives then for using this. And then in some cases, though, that's why I was glad to see this article just the other day regarding chronic knee and back and all that, that to use them in conjunction with something else to, not get them so addicted.
Not just rely solely on opiates.
Right.
Yeah, because I also wonder if it's something in our society where we've developed a very low threshold for pain, and anyone remotely on pain, is there a bit of that too, do you suspect?
I think that there's got to be something. I think the statistics we're 5% of the world's population, and I think it's like 87% of the opiates are being consumed in the United States.
Oh, it's
So that's like, come on.
That's crazy. Okay. Yeah. Well, so you guys, you've got the roughest medical system, I believe, or healthcare system, I should say, because there's just so much money to be made out of the US economy. It's a first world. It's got 300 million plus. If Australia had the same as that, or England, then the big pharma would be focusing on that more. So it's really tough for you guys on multiple levels, I think. But I think this is a world. I haven't researched enough, but my understanding is it's a worldwide crisis.
It is, and I think that it is driven by corruption and greed. And and I have heard they're trying to reach out into the European markets now, because maybe they see that there is an end in sight here for us. For so long, it wasn't. Me and many of the others that are trying to do something about this would be like, let's just give up. We can't. But all of a sudden, we can. We're not giving up, and we keep each other bolstered. And
my mind goes to almost a conspiratorial idea, which may or may not be true, but I'll pitch it to you that what if they are trying to, when I say they, I don't mean all of them, but let's say big pharma corporations actually know that a certain percentage will get addicted to these. Is there a bit of that too? Do you think?
I absolutely think that's correct. Yeah, they knew. They knew what they were doing.
So really, our politicians are our last line of defense. If they let these go through, see your example there with pill mills, even though you were lobbying for years to shut those down, when they're when something's not against the law, you can't do much, can you? And so the problem is, we trust our politicians to do the right thing, and I think sometimes they do. Don't get me wrong, but I think we need to expose. Yeah, we maybe need to expose the relationships they have with big pharma, and that's another part of what I'm talking about. There's a big picture here that's quite frightening, and I think you've succeeded in hitting this on the first few layers, which has also brought attention to the, you and your organization can't fight at all on the highest levels, and you're only in Florida, is my understanding, or you're US wide?
I'm primarily in Florida, and there is a mother in Louisville, Kentucky named Emily Walden that lost her son to the drug Opana. And there's really much more on that too. And she's been to the FDA meetings, and she spoke to Scott Gottlieb, the director of the FDA, and said we need to do something about this, how these drugs are being approved and they shouldn't be. Why do we continually approve more
Yeah.
opiates in this environment here? So she has done a lot, and she started a Stop Now Kentucky also.
Okay. Okay. So what would be your, from here, like it sounds like we've progressed. And I think also if it is branching out into Europe and a worldwide thing, then we can take lessons. Often, like
Yes.
here, for example, down under, we say, well, the US has done this, and then that pressures politicians. So it sounds like you guys have succeeded, and others, in getting it to a certain level where we're starting to get to the point where there's a limitation on how long they can prescribe it for. And my understanding is after 5 days, if they needed more, they have to go back again. They can't just stash up and so. But the thing is, what would be your message? Like I just read today that this year, the CDC, I think, was commenting that opiate overdoses are up by 30% from last year. So still, it seems to be getting worse. So what is your message from here on what ways can society begin to end the opiate epidemic?
I think I would really like to see people get more involved. And even this, like the limited 3-day prescribing, that will help curtail new addictions. So we're not going to see a drastic drop in this immediately when that goes into effect. But we will down the line see, I think, less and less, because you won't be dealing with that problem. And then let's help the ones that are already addicted. Let's put forth some money. We need more treatment beds. And what they're doing in the hospitals now, and just now this is starting to change here also. I don't know about other states, but what they were doing, you gave someone Narcan. Now Narcan brings back someone from an overdose. It covers the reception site of the opiate, and they immediately are brought back to life. Now they would bring them to the hospital. This is when an EMT or police, something like that, brings them to the hospital, and they just discharge them and say, don't do drugs again. And that's really neglect. And then they're, sometimes more than once in one day, the same EMTs are going out. In Hollywood, city of Hollywood, they have a drug overdose call every 20 minutes. So now we're getting peer reviews in the hospital, peer specialists to say, look, let me help you. Let me take you to a treatment center. Your life doesn't have to be like this. I've been there, and you can get through this, and offer them services, instead of just discharging them. So that will help. And then there's also something called Vivitrol, which the only thing the MAT, are you familiar with that term?
No.
It's medically assisted treatment.
Okay.
Now we've had Suboxone, and what Suboxone is an opiate, but
is that like Subutex, or it's different?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and now the only thing I don't like about this is all of a sudden the big pharmas, riding their white horse in, I'm going to save them. And it's more billions of dollars for them. I mean, when they passed the CARA Act, it was, there's a lot of money in there, and a lot of it's going to the pharmaceutical companies because they're approving that, and they're saying they need this, and they do need it, but the merry-go-round will never stop if you don't have the limited opioid prescribing. We need the DEA to stop production. Well, stopping production would be optimal, but we can't get that. But if they would reduce production and have less and less and less, then these meds could help those that already have the problem.
Actually, that's not a bad idea. If they have limited supplies available, the doctors themselves, then they won't be so. Is that what you mean by limiting the amount of production?
Well, the DEA approves how much can be produced every year.
Okay.
And in my book, I also speak about something called the pharmacy crawl, and people were having to go from pharmacy to pharmacy to get their drugs. And there was a shortage at one time of the opiates, and the pill mills were high then, as far as their distribution of these drugs, giving it out like a candy store. But yet they blamed the DEA for the shortage in our country, that they didn't let them produce enough. So, I mean, the whole thing is like so bizarro land that but
Yeah.
it's really the overprescribing that naturally has caused this. And what they base it on is how many have were prescribed the year before. So my point was, they also have these drug take back programs. You probably don't have that in Australia and don't need it, but for instance, they're telling people, come down and empty your medicine cabinet, and they're getting 34 tons sometimes
Holy
on
shit.
these
Okay.
take-backs. Yeah. Now, these are
Whoa.
paid for
34,
by
34 tons from
34
what?
tons. Yes. Out of all the people that bring them back, because now it's on the news, and they're like, oh, no, I don't want this and all that,
Yeah, yeah.
Not bought and paid for. Well, you should reduce the production by that amount.
That's
And if
true.
this many
Yeah.
people died, you're not going to have them taking it this year, so every year the production should go down lower and lower. And for a long time, there would have never been acceptance of this. But like I say, all of a sudden I see this arena changing here. And even have, one time I tried to get a representative to mandate the PDMP usage of it. And she said to me, oh, well, if you don't have the approval of the FMA, which is the Florida Medical Association, I can't do that. I'm like, why are you in office? Why are you there?
True. Yeah, so then, okay. Janet, from a humanitarian...
I don't know, did I lose you, James?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I just saw a bad internet.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, you're there. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And you've had some prescription companies that their utilization is companies and employees of companies that need whatever drugs, anti-hypertensive or anything. And they themselves, I think it was Easy Scripts and also CVS Pharmacy now has done that if you have a doctor come in, a new prescription come in and it's a 30-day supply, they're only going to fill it for 10.
Okay.
Now, what's wrong with the AMA, the American Medical Association? Why do these other companies, they should be ashamed of themselves that they're not the one initiating this,
Actually, you mentioned the word shame there. And I think that also, on a different subject, but tying into maybe the potential solutions, and you alluded to this also with more beds and so on, is I think there's a shame aspect with people coming forward. Like, imagine that woman who was a finance grad, she was an outstanding citizen, suddenly she has a minor injury, she's hooked on the painkillers, then she turns to heroin finally. So I think surely part of the solution also is to remove the stigma with all this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even when Governor Chris Christie was running for presidential office, he was saying that he lost a friend to this, top of their law school class, married like a model, let's say, and he was the top one to make it as a partner in a firm and all this, but he was a runner. He took very good care of himself, and Governor Christie is quite a bit overweight. And this guy was, ship shape, and he was out running and sprained an ankle. He got addicted. Wow. He lost his family. He lost his job. He died in a motel room alone.
Okay.
So this is what's happening. Yeah.
I mean, I know a woman in California who's lobbying about the Narcan thing. I don't fully understand I just know she's doing that. But is Narcan something that families could have themselves, or is that right?
In some states, and we passed that. I can remember being somewhere trying to get petitions signed that we should be able to do this. There was opposition to that too, and many still feel that some policemen feel like I don't think we should do this because it gives them a false sense of security. If you're in a group, you and I and 3 other people, and we know someone has Narcan, let's get high. But I'm like, no, come on.
I would argue, what if you were sitting next to someone that was saved, their life was saved by that? Although it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because also if people are taking it recklessly, these drugs, then there'll be more deaths, but there will be more people saved. So what's the answer there?
I remember going to this seminar once where they have actually done MRIs on the person that is addicted. Their pleasure center gets larger, and
Right.
the CEO in charge there of their brain gets smaller, and they see this on MRIs. And these treatment centers that are only 28 days and that kind of thing, it's not enough time. And so those people will do anything to get that drug. You know, these were good people, and now they're stealing from their,
Yeah.
mothers, writing out checks out of their checkbooks and, that kind of thing, because they will do anything to get that drug. So I don't agree with that on the Narcan, that if it wasn't there, they wouldn't do it.
That's
And
true.
then,
That's true. Yeah.
yeah. And then, like I've said to some policemen, and I can understand your frustration, but you're seeing 100% of what you see is you're getting a call and you go out there and you save them. You're getting a call, you go out there and you save them. And sometimes you do see over and over the same person. But the one that made it, the one that went to detox and rehab and now is taking college classes and has a job, you never see that one again. So you don't
That's
know
true. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
did help someone, so.
And the other thing you mentioned in your book is, I thought poignant, is you say that it was something like, let me think, that was it, that the amount of deaths that are called overdose is just when it's literally they took them, let's say, that night, and then they died and it's still in their system. But what about how many others that develop certain diseases over time that were killed? Or you gave the example, a friend of yours son walked into traffic.
Right.
And so that, how many people like that we just go, well, he wasn't concentrating where he was going? Or
No, it's as I said in the book, that is my quote. It's these numbers, as high as they are, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because the many that they're driving, like that couple that you saw there, they drive into a tree and they're killed. That's a motor vehicle accident.
True.
Many are deemed suicides, and they're not. The cause of death on the ME report is not drug overdose. So, but it really was from drug overdose. You know what I'm saying?
And then we need to look at how the drugs, maybe it wasn't, you could have someone who's been a depressive all their life, so maybe they tried suicide before, but then you don't know whether the addiction would contribute and make it worse and tip them over the edge into suicide. So, and then, as we say, there's how many people are not dying from it, but what we talked about there about the stigma of it, the shame.
Right.
How many people would just be quietly living their lives? Maybe they're still coping, holding down a job, but they're addicted, and I don't know. Right. Scary.
Yeah, it is. And the cost. The opioid crisis cost $504 billion in the United States, and that figures from 2015.
So that's the cost on taxpayers?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, well...
And that's...
Sorry, you go ahead.
Okay, when I first started writing to legislators about the drug-addicted babies, I used to say, if you don't care about this human life and this poor baby on our unit and what happens to them, what about the cost? You could end the national debt. A baby that's on our unit for months and months using all these disciplines versus a two-day normal newborn delivery in and out. It's astronomical.
That's right. And also we can't put prices on human lives, can we?
Right. But they seem to be. It didn't seem to matter for a long, long time, but now it matters. I see that. So I think we're having change here, which we definitely need.
And do you think, from an outside perspective, I think everyone in the Western world looks at the US and we can't understand your healthcare system, how you don't have universal healthcare. And I think you're the only developed Western nation that doesn't have those things. And yet it's meant to be the top economy. And so do you feel any of that contributes to these things? Like, do poorer people who get addicted, can they afford to even go to a counselor or things like that?
I think I think that this particular opiate epidemic
Mm.
and the ones that affected are really from more affluent families.
Actually,
And
I've noticed that from the reports I'm
yeah,
reading. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't think the insurance companies or our healthcare system has much of a play in this. Although naturally, now that we are here, we do need treatment beds, and
Mm.
in different counties there are facilities. In Broward County, it's called BARC, and that is a county facility where, you know, it is paid for by Medicare or Medicaid, one of the two, I forget which. And, you know, so this is big expense to the states too. So
Right.
they are, you know, but people, I went to this one round table that we were having, and the one man, because this, you know, they're trying to get where we can similar to the Baker Act, except for it's a little bit longer, where we can make them go to a facility. Don't say, no, you're not going to be able to turn this down. You have to go. And that man was saying, we have no treatment beds. We have 200 people in cars at night trying to get
Wow.
into our facility. So
It's a
there is
disaster.
that too. Yeah, it is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
disaster. The whole thing's a disaster.
Just thinking there. Yeah, that's well, I've pretty much run out of my questions, but I know this, I'm sure that I've overlooked some important points in your book. So is there anything anything that you pressing that you think is you wanted to add there, or?
Just that I would like very much for people to be aware of what is happening, and that they can do something about it. To people in the United States, write to your legislators. There's also what I had spoke about on my website, which is STOPPNow.com, STOPPnow.com. I do have under current projects what I am working on, and right now it's very much trying to get the limited opiate prescribing on the state level, but there's also on the federal level I'm going to be working on. It's in my book, and it was also a big story on 60 Minutes and the Washington Post, how Representative Marino, and I was in Representative Blackburn's office bringing her the court documents, DEA versus Walgreen, and how some of these pharmacies went from under 100,000 units a year to almost 3 million. And what they did, what Marino and Blackburn did, was they passed a bill that ties the hands of the DEAs, that they can't just go into these pharmacies and review their records and take their license away. And that was a crime that happened, because all we have had all along is DEA and law enforcement. We have not had legislators. And it did come out that these legislators were paid very well by the drug companies in their state, and that's where their allegiance lies. And even I've been in Senator Marco Rubio's office in Miami and in Washington, D.C. And, you know, in front of me, they're saying, oh, he's all for ending this. And now he co-sponsored that bill.
Really?
So, yeah. So Senator Joe Manchin has a bill that he is going to try to rescind that bill. It's Senate Bill 1960, and the House bill is 4084. So I am going to be,
if Donald Trump's listening, is there anything he can do?
I would love to meet with President Trump. I have written him a couple times and said, I want to help you drain the swamp, and I think you're getting some bad advice, and please meet with me. So I hope he is listening.
You never know. You never know. I mean, maybe it will come to a point where even the most corrupt administrations, that they have to tackle this. They're going to be forced to. So yeah. All right, Janet. Well, I think you're doing a fantastic job, and I hope people, if they're listening and they might be one of the ones that are feeling the stigma, or they know other people who are addicted, maybe they can start by looking at the resources on your website, and that's Stop Now, and that's double P, STOPPNow.com. And is there anywhere else they can reach you?
My email address, if they like, is stopnow@yahoo.com, and the book is Stop Now.
Stop Now, and anyone can find your book, paperback or Kindle edition, on Amazon.
Amazon,
and I've just read that, reviewed it, loved it. And I think that's a great place, actually. If that's the simplest way, because what was great was you've obviously got the scientific background being a nurse, but you wrote it for the layman to understand. So I appreciated that.
Thank you. Many people have told me that it's very easy to read, and they can hear me talking as they're reading the book.
You didn't just dictate it, did you? And then no, no, that's great when you write and it sounds that personable, as opposed to some sort of academic writing, from their high tower in a university. It's a lot more. It just feels like an ordinary person speaking to you. So that's great.
Yeah. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to spread the word about this.
No worries, Janet. And maybe we'll do it again sometime a few years down the track. Hopefully there's nothing more to report. It's success.
Yes. Maybe that's what we'll be reporting on, that it's over.
All right. Well done, Janet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James.